We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AVRant. My name is Rob H., and this week I'm here with...
Lee Overstreet, AVRant pinch hitter and subwoofer enthusiast.
Ah, yes, very much so now.
Very much.
That's awesome. Yes, Tom Andry, the regular host of this podcast, is away this week. I'll let him fill people in once he gets back, but we're not sure when he'll be back, if that'll be next week. As folks who've been listening to this podcast know, he's been dealing with some renovations, which have only been getting... more and more.
I feel for him. I have some homeowner issues right now too, but his are even worse.
So that's what he's dealing with. Don't anybody worry. It's not health related. It's all house related. But of course, if your house is being dismantled, it's difficult to record a podcast. So that is why Tom is away.
It's also bad for your mental health.
Indeed.
I'm certain of that. It's extremely frustrating. I have some painting issues. I've been painting outside, and I got my window frames white and perfect and restored and beautiful, and then it rained and my tree dripped brown gunk,
lovely.
And now it's stained instantly and forever, and I'm so mad. But I'd rather have that problem than Rob's plumbing issues.
Tom's. But yes,
I'm sorry, Tom. Sorry.
While he is away, big thanks to Lee Overstreet for filling in on wasn't super duper short notice this week.
No, not too bad, not too
bad. A little bit of warning, but yes, we are here. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to answer some home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is email us, and please do email us. That is most definitely the best way to get your question to us. It allows me to search through things and find them more easily versus trying to spread myself across however many different social media platforms. So question@avrant.com. That's our email address, question@avrant.com. Please send your questions there. You can reach out to us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/avrant. Podcast? Yeah, there's a podcast at the end of that one. Now I'm forgetting. That's what happens when you're like the lead host for the week. You forget what has a podcast on the end of it and what doesn't. But Facebook does.
I can't even remember your name and Tom's name.
That's what happens.
We're very flustered.
We have a website, of course, avrant.com. If you haven't guessed by now, you can leave a comment there. And then, you can reach out to us individually. I have my own email address, which is rob@avrant.com. Tom has his, which is tom@avrant.com. And then we're all on Twitter. I'm @FirstReflect. Tom is @AVRant_Tom, and Lee is on Twitter as well. He is Lee Overstreet, and on Twitter he is...
@Lee Overtweet. Because I'm so clever.
Isn't it, though?
One of these days, I think I'm 2.5 years away from avrant.com email address.
I mean,
Because I think you have to go 10 years with the podcast to get that.
You did a review, did a special episode. A little bit more, that's all.
Yeah, getting there. I'm going to get that email address,
tease it out.
and I'm going to find an excuse to put an underscore in it, just to
pretty much,
just to make it difficult.
So, yes, as we always do here, we're going to begin by thanking our listeners of the week, who are people who have supported our lovely little podcast in some way or another. If you would like to give a one-time donation, you can do that via PayPal, and the way to get to the PayPal account is to come to our website, avrant.com. And over on the right-hand side, there's a link there that says Support AVRant. There's a picture of a cup of coffee that Tom made, and he's very proud of himself because he's not a Photoshop master.
Good picture.
But it's a good cup of coffee. You click on that, it
is.
takes you to our PayPal, and you can make a one-time donation there. I do not know if anybody gave PayPal donations because Tom is the only one who sees that, and he's away this week. So if anybody did, thank you very much. But for anyone who might like to, that's how you do it. Website and over on the right-hand side. But Patreon.com is a place you can go and sign up for an automatic monthly donation. You say, here's how many dollars I'd like to give AVRant Podcast every month, and they will take that from your account directly and automatically and send most of it to us. So it's patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you'd like to sign up there. I forgot to mention we're on YouTube, youtube.com/AVRant. That's the one that always throws us off. It's the only one that doesn't have a podcast on the end of it. But that's
right.
YouTube where you can
and
see
also,
our video.
It's the only one where you can't really interact because Tom hates YouTube
Oh,
comments.
that's me. I'm the one who shut down the comments.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah.
I thought it was Tom.
Nah, I pretty much take care of the YouTube side, and I'm like, I don't.
Really?
It's so we get some really nice comments. I would like to be able to leave them open. I just don't want to deal with the multitude of really stupid, horrible ones. And I'm like, yeah, I know they got their spam filters and everything. I'm like, I don't want to look through it. I don't want to comb through it. It's just not worth my time.
It's not too bad.
It's not the end of the world. But I'm like, you know what? It's just no. We're not collecting questions from there. I'm sorry.
No questions.
It's just just forget about that. It's not. It's the only place we get like hateful messages. So I'm like, why even?
Aww.
Why even bother? It's just not.
What
worth
is
it.
there to hate about
It's
this
YouTube,
podcast?
man. People hate everything that's on YouTube. The only thing they
true.
want is nothing. That would make them happy. All videos are gone. I guess they're finally happy. But no, back to Patreon, patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you want to support us automatically. We did tick down to 120 patrons. We were at 121. I'm surprised it took this many weeks for the number to move down. But no, that's very understandable at this time. So yeah. That's our financial support, but people also support us in non-financial ways. So we want to thank those folks as well. Neil M, he clicked on the AVRant option when he registered his pair of SVS PC2000 Pro cylinder subs to let them know that he heard about them from us. He also gave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. So that was very nice. Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah, that's...
I'm just happy to hear someone else got them some SVS subwoofers.
It's a pretty common occurrence around here. Enough that they actually put in a little radio button that you can select AVRant as the people who referred you. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Cool. Monty N, he bought 2 pairs of RBH EP1 earphones, and he told RBH that we recommended them. And he also says they sound good. So yay, happiness all around.
And how about that? I have RBH headphones as well, earbuds. So yeah. Those are some common brand names for this podcast.
That's right. And then also, while we are still dealing with this global pandemic that's going on, there are folks who very nicely send us messages just saying they're thanking us for keeping the podcast going because there are challenges for sure keeping things like this going every week. So really appreciate those messages of encouragement. So thank you to Art, Brian, and Neil for sending those messages.
And Rob, I'll give you a message of encouragement right now. I know your job requires dealing with the public.
It does indeed. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, the public.
As I have said,
they're the worst.
Up until, in Canada, we are beginning to open things up as has been happening in the States as well. So most of North America is sort of on the same page there. But up until now, I've been saying it's been only the worst people and the best people. There were only the 2 types who were out while everything was locked down.
Yes.
And now that things are opening back out, we're getting people who fit into the middle between those 2 polar sides of things. So it's getting a little bit more back to normal, but I'm still taking every precaution that I can because man, I unfortunately am interacting and exposed to the public at large, and so it has the whole mask thing hasn't been quite as contentious in my area. Vancouver is a very multicultural area, and wearing face masks is kind of normal, so it's not nobody really looks sideways.
It gets a little weird here. Alabama's taken the Peter Pan approach. We just wish and believe that everything's fine.
It's certainly
most people do okay.
It seems to be area to area. It varies. You can't, say it across an entire country,
And when I say most people do okay here, what I mean is they don't berate you for a mask, but they're definitely not wearing one.
I'm sure that is out there in some areas too. So
I'm really weird.
I'm
I
hoping,
have a mask on and I stand
I'm
out.
hoping I stay safe, mostly for the possibility of exposing anyone in my family to it. That's what I'm really worried about. But in any case, I'm doing all right. In fact, well enough that I'll go ahead and mention. I just threw it in the news because I didn't want to make a whole other header for one little note.
It's news.
It's news, which is that I appeared as a guest on the Bright Side Home Theater podcast. That's with the host DJ, who is an avid AVRant listener, self-proclaimed fan of ours. So he had Tom on the Bright Side Home Theater podcast just a few weeks ago, where it was the first half was sort of interviewing Tom, and then the second half they talked about Jurassic Park, which DJ does over there is he's talking about the actual content that he's watching in his home theater. So he'll pick a movie, that's what he watches that week, and then in his regular episodes where it's just DJ talking, he sort of actually picks out like individual scenes to talk about either interesting aspects about that scene or how it particularly demonstrates his home theater or the experience that having a full calibrated theater allows him to appreciate given scenes and that. So it gets into the
So it's a deep dive.
Yeah, details of
into
individual
scenes. Yeah,
but
neat.
with Tom and I, first of all, his normal episodes are probably about 45 minutes on average. Both Tom and I did like 2.5 hour long episodes because, it's Tom and
Because it's
Rob.
what you do.
It seems we're incapable of doing any small length podcast. But to be fair, again, it was sort of like an interview for the first half with me, and DJ sort of reveled in the opportunity to just throw some home theater questions at me. No preparation beforehand, just to see, do I actually know this stuff off the top of my head, or does it take weeks of preparation? So hopefully I like acquitted myself fairly well to the questions that were posed.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
But then the second half, it might be a little bit more than the second half. I've been saying for a while now, I wanted to talk about Netflix's She-Ra for quite a while, the updated version of She-Ra that Netflix put out there, which I absolutely loved and had no adults to talk about it with. And I'm like, there are definitely...
Yeah, you can't be discussing with like kids online.
There are definitely things in that show that I'm like, a kid who's like 8 or 9 is not going to be thinking about what I was thinking about watching that show. So DJ and I had a really fun conversation about that. In fact, because it was going so darn long, I'm the one who was like, okay, at some point this podcast needs to stop. And afterwards I was like, oh man, there's like 3 other things I wanted to mention that we didn't get to. So
yep. I do recall you, of all the things you mentioned on Twitter, that show and about 2 or 3 others.
It's because I want
get a lot of attention
I want
from
people
you.
to check it out, and I want an adult to
I got
talk
it,
about
yeah.
it with. So anyway,
I need to.
The Bright Side Home Theater Podcast will have a link to my episode that should be coming out this Friday, like same day that this episode is coming out of AVRant. So yeah, that's it, and I'll let Lee talk a little bit now because we got a news story.
Yeah, let's do some really weird news here. A bunch of older, but not super old, mostly from 2015, Samsung Blu-ray player models suddenly got stuck in an unending startup loop. All of a sudden, Samsung's aware of the issue. Speculation is that it's due to expiring SSL certificates, which prompted AVRant listener Jason S. to forward a Sound and Vision article that explains the situation. Basically, things would be fine as long as an update is issued before the certificate expires. But if your device can't even boot up because its certificate is expired, then how does it get the update? Catch-22, loop-de-loo, the space-time continuum goes into a spiral and you can't get out.
Speculation is that it's actually going to require them to send you a physical boot disc.
Oh no, a boot disc for your Blu-ray
player. Well, what else are you supposed to do? You can't get to a USB drive if you can't boot up. You can't get to a internet firmware update if you can't boot up.
So unlike a computer, you can't get to the BIOS to tell it to boot from something else.
Yeah.
So
you gotta throw a boot drive.
That's ridiculous
in there. That's a speculation. I don't even know if that's possible. So who knows?
Do you remember back when nothing got updates and you just turned stuff on and it worked? Do you remember that?
Everything gets updates now. It's constant around. I live alone and I'm just constantly updating things. That takes a good portion of my week. But no, this whole matter of SSL certificates, the reason Sound and Vision wrote a whole article about it is because most SSL certificates that are out there, I mean, this is like every device that connects to the internet, which, as we just mentioned, is practically everything these days. It can be things you don't always expect, right? It could literally be your clock radio. If it connects to the internet, it still has to have an SSL certificate. And those typically have like a 20-year expiration date. So we've got lots of devices that, first of all, are getting to the 20-year point now. So if they never, so it's very, if they want to update it, it's very simple. As long as there's some way of updating the device, you can update the certificate. It's not a thing where it's like hard coded in there and your device is going to brick itself. But if there is,
I'm just realizing how many things I own are getting close to 20 years old and are also
internet
maybe
connected,
possibly. Maybe.
That's why there's
I'm like a 2000s guy, man. I've got so much stuff.
Well, that's why they're saying they're a little worried that this might be another like Y2K thing, which is like Y2K would have been an issue if updates hadn't been done to the software. So again, this is even easier because I mean, there's already an entire infrastructure in place for updating certificates. But if it isn't done, then you could end up with your devices doing some weird things like infinite boot up loops. So it's something to potentially be aware of and to actually be on top of making sure you get your updates. But people were like, why is a device from 2015 potentially having a certificate expire? And they were pointing out, they're like, well, basically, they've been using the same certificate ever since the first Blu-ray player. They just never bothered to create a new one. And that would have been, like 17 years ago at this point or something.
Something like that, yeah. Wow, that's getting on back there. Here we have comments, not so much news, but comments. Martin D. just wanted to share that his Epson Pro Cinema 4040 recently died. R.I.P. Epson 440. Seemingly the dreaded power supply issue that has plagued several Epson models, but he phoned Epson on a Monday, and they had a replacement delivered to him on a Tuesday. So good service, and he got a new lamp out of it, although it did mean losing all of his calibrated picture settings.
Yeah.
But that's a loss I'll take to get a whole working Epson Pro Cinema 40.
I mean, it's one of those, given the circumstances, that's about as good as you can do. You know, you call them on Monday morning, and the next day they have a replacement to you. You're getting a new lamp, which is a pretty good thing. But I mean, it is unfortunate to lose calibrated picture settings. That's not a super trivial thing, especially on a projector where you might have done a fair amount of tweaking to some of those menus. But yeah, all things considered, good to hear. What I mainly just wanted to emphasize is that some people asked, like, you know, since Epson has had these dying power supply issues, it affected a fair number of 5040 UB units, which of course is a popular projector that we've often recommended. And some people question, like, should you still be recommending that model because it's had some of these known issues? And I'm like, as long as Epson is getting you a replacement like within 2-3 days, in this case 1 day in Martin's case, I'm like, I'm still gonna stand behind them. If they didn't do that type of service, then yeah, I'd be questioning it. But as long as they continue that really good service, I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm still willing to recommend Epson.
Yeah, that's solid. That's really solid. So now it's time for questions. Leftover questions from last week. Yes, let's just jump right into the questions with Alex Y. Back to Alex's townhouse setup once again. Now, have I been on when we saw Alex's townhouse setup?
I am not certain
I don't think
if
so.
that was an episode with you. But Tom and I have talked about Alex's townhouse on certainly more than one occasion, at least two, if
I don't know. I feel like I've seen, or maybe I've just seen something like it. A lot of people have these.
Yes, it's not an unusual layout.
Coming down the stairs into a little basement area. So in any event, Alex has decided to go with the Ascend Sierra 2 front speakers and Sierra Luna surrounds to start. He'll add an SVS PC-2000 Pro cylinder to the right of his fireplace when he's saved up a bit more, and the center speaker might be added later depending on how the Phantom Center sounds. I bet you he'll get that pretty quick. So, we had mentioned how he might have to compromise a bit with the positioning of his surround speakers given that the left side of his room is just open. There's a possibility he could put them on stands, but they would have to go directly to each side of his couch. Would that be too close?
I mean, directly
if you can see them both, yeah. I guess if it's right up against your head,
yeah,
that's too.
You know, I mean, if you have a couch, but there's only ever one person sitting right in the middle of it, then it would be okay. But I'm assuming you occasionally have people sitting to the left or right side seat of the couch. Now, if you did say your surround right speaker is basically right beside your window, so it's got a little bit of distance there, and then, but I mean, that would mean your surround left speaker is like standing in the middle of your open space there, and I kind of doubt
that's awkward. And then where's the wire go?
Yeah, and plus right in front of your window and all that. And it looks like it is sort of a little bit of a walkway to the right side of his couch. So I probably let that, and I don't really think it's super duper necessary given that the alternatives we're going to mention.
Right. So his best options for wall mounting are behind him, and he would almost certainly elevate them, but the surround left speaker would either be close to the bathroom door or close to the entrance with the stairway. He wouldn't want anyone to potentially bump their head on the speaker. So what do we suggest? He was thinking he'd use the Video Secu wall mounts that Rob suggested, but how should the surrounds actually be aimed? Point them right at the main seat, or just tilt them down if they're elevated? Or should he try as hard as he can to follow Dolby's guidelines of having them at seated ear height? I like a foot above my head and generally aimed at me.
Yeah, it's sort of. I'm certainly not going to say still at ear height. You know, I tried it in my own theater. I'm like, let's just lower these down because I got adjustable height stands, and I'm like, nah, this just isn't right for surrounds. Having them right at seated ear height, I'm like, they need to be a foot and a half ish. You know, the tweeter about maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet above your head. I'm like, that's just where they should go. I'm sticking to that. That's what Tom and I have said the entire time. It's what Dolby used to say until they changed.
It's what they used to say. Right. That's how I decided on my setup. When we did the episode with me, everybody saw my living room, and my surround speakers are about a foot and a half above your head if you're seated, and the tweeter driver is probably
like
a foot behind my head, maybe.
So
something like that.
I would definitely have them a little bit elevated. Now, with the Sierra Lunas, they do have a keyhole mount where you could just put an anchored screw into the wall and just keyhole mount it without even purchasing a separate wall mount. And while that would not allow you to tilt them down or angle them in toward you, given the location of your available walls, I'm like, I don't think you need to do either of those things. The Sierra Lunas have exceedingly wide horizontal dispersion. So if they were just flush mounted on the wall and firing straight forward, you're still going to get a very good surround effect from that. I really do not think that you need to toe in the surround speakers for the positions that you're going to have. I mean, he's got the image with it sort of like in the corner in the right, but I'm like, no, just put it on the flat part of the wall facing straight forward. Mimic the same thing with your surround left, so it's on the little section of wall between your entrance and your bathroom door, and just fire it straight forward, use the keyhole mount.
I like that.
And you wouldn't want to get them too high because there is a little bit of limited vertical dispersion with the Sierra Lunas with their ribbon tweeter. But if you're staying with that sort of 1.5 feet above your head, and at that point, once you stand up, it's not really at head height, it's sort of at like shoulder height. You know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, nobody's going to bang themselves on that. These things are barely 6 inches deep front to back.
What you do is you get a tall, skinny cactus and put it underneath the speaker, and people will darn sure walk around the cactus. They'll never hit the speaker. Just put something under the speaker in that spot, and everybody has to walk around it.
So that's what I actually think you should do. I want to save you some money. I don't think you even need a separate wall mount. I say just fire them straight forward and use the included keyhole mount.
Amen. I like that. He'll either get the Denon X3600H or X3700H, depending on price and availability. But if he follows his plan, he won't have a subwoofer right away. Uh-oh, now we're in my world for a long time. So how does that impact things when running Audyssey and making manual settings changes? He doesn't want to potentially damage his Sierra 2 speakers by trying to run them full range without a sub. So how does he handle things with no subwoofer to start? So in his case, he does not have the kind of speakers I had when I had no subwoofer for the longest time. These are much smaller speakers.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest in that case if you can't get subwoofer just yet?
You know what? I'm going to go a little bit off the question as wrote because my genuine recommendation is, given the price point of the Sierra Lunas that you were going to pick up as surrounds, which is $11.50 for a pair of them. They're not inexpensive. Yeah. That more than covers the cost of the PC2000 Pro subwoofer. I'm like, I would opt, since you have the budget to get one pair of fronts and one pair of surrounds, but not a subwoofer at the same time. I'm like, I think you get the one pair of fronts and the subwoofer at the same time, and you add the surrounds later.
The only reason I tolerated no sub for all those years is simply because my speakers were monsters with 15-inch woofers that did pretty good. And I didn't know what I was missing, so it seemed pretty fun. I could get a thump in my chest and rock the house, But yeah, with smaller speakers, I'd rather have a sub if I have smaller speakers than to have surrounds.
Yeah. Now, if you say, no way, no how, I'm definitely buying 4 speakers and no sub to start, I can't stop you. So
that's true.
With the Sierra 2s, they're actually surprisingly bass-capable speakers. You're not going to have any options. So you would have only 2 options. One would be to tell your AV receiver that you do have a subwoofer, even though you don't, which would, of course, allow you to then set a crossover for all of your smaller speakers. Yeah. But at that point, you would literally be missing the low-frequency effects channel. because the low frequency
That's
effects channel will always come out of the subwoofer output if you say you have a subwoofer. So
you're going to kind of miss it anyway.
you're going to miss some of it, but I mean, there's definitely bass that's at like 50, 60 hertz in the low frequency effects channel that the Sierra 2 front speakers could definitely play. So if you want to make sure that you do hear what you can of the low frequency effects channel, you have no choice. If you say the subwoofer is not there, if you say no, then your front speakers are automatically set to large, at which point I would simply say be a little bit careful. Don't crank the volume immediately. The Sierra 2s are robust speakers. You are not sitting super far away. The odds of you damaging them are low, but don't go nuts. Don't, crank the volume way up immediately. Turn it up gradually. If you're hearing any signs of distress, then, turn it a little bit down. You very likely won't. It's very difficult to damage those speakers, but
back in the day, we hooked speakers up to stereos, and we didn't worry about whether or not they were set to full. Yes. Yeah, did it all the time. So just don't go.
When it was stereo music, you weren't getting like low frequency effects the way that you might. DTS,
not the 20 hertz.
DTS with their 10 decibel boost in the bass down at 20 hertz. You'd be like, yeah, that can start making a woofer have some distress.
Right. All right, he has some other Audyssey-related questions. Does it matter if video processing is on or off? Now, he has several of these questions, so maybe we should do it like a lightning round.
I'll rapid fire these. Yeah, as far as Audyssey...
Doesn't matter if video processing is on or off.
Yeah, as far as Audyssey is concerned, that makes no effect. But I will say, if you turn the video processing off, you will very likely have less heat coming off the top of your Denon receiver. The video processing tends to contribute a lot of heat, and it's not really necessary. There's not really a tremendous amount of benefit, other than if you just super duper want to see the volume come up, when you change the volume, or what input shows up on your screen. And some people really like to have that, so then you would have it on, but that you could turn all of the actual processing itself off. Don't have it actually adjusting the image in any way. But I recommend just turning it off. It saves you the heat.
Right on. Should the master volume be set to 0 before Audyssey starts? I think I know the answer to that.
You don't have to. We got that straight from the creator of Audyssey's mouth. It is not necessary for you to do that. But what I will say is, if you are testing the manual test tones afterwards, after Audyssey is run, you go into the manual setup and you're adjusting the trim levels manually. For those test tones to be playing at the correct volume level, you do need to set the master volume to 0 before you begin those. So that's very likely where any confusion comes in. For the manual test tones, the master volume should be at 0. For Audyssey, it doesn't matter.
Right. Dynamic EQ on or off? Well, that's a matter of taste, isn't it?
It is, pretty much. We certainly recommend turning it on, but if it's late at night...
I didn't like it.
Yeah, if it's late at night and the entire point was to not have the bass remain audible, then you'll want to turn it off, because what dynamic EQ does is attempt to keep everything audible. So if you have turned your volume down to, say, minus 35 or something like that, for the bass to still be audible, it's now going to be like 25 decibels louder than everything else. And they're going to go, well, that doesn't sound even, and I didn't want all of this bass to still be audible. So it's a little bit situation dependent. But in terms of if you're sitting down for a movie, but you're just not having the volume at full master volume like most of us don't, for that scenario, I want to turn dynamic EQ on, because I'm probably going to have the volume pretty loud, but not all the way up to reference. And I want the bass to be where it should be for that scenario.
I might play with it again, but I just found it unnatural. I didn't like it. Just everything seemed wrongly sort of boomy.
It depends on your relative volume level, basically. At reference volume, it's doing nothing, but clearly, if you're noticing it, then you're not at full reference volume.
Exactly. Should he double check distance settings after? I did.
For curiosity, sure, but I mean, you shouldn't. It does a really accurate job with the speakers, and for the subwoofer in particular, no, because the subwoofer, what it's doing there is adding a delay to the signal, and with bass sound waves, the actual physical distance from you to the sub is not what we're worried about. So for the subwoofer, don't touch it. Leave that wherever Audyssey set the subwoofer distance. For the speakers, you can double check it, but it's going to be bang on.
Right. For my Yamaha, it was within like 4 centimeters.
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about
one
that.
Speaker. Yeah, it was pretty close. Excuse me. That LPF for LFE setting, change that or leave it?
Leave it at 120. I don't know why they let you change it. Leave it at 120.
Yeah, just leave it alone. Once he has a sub, all speakers should be set to small, right?
Yes, indeed. And if you follow our advice, you'll be beginning with just 2 speakers and they'll be set to small.
Yeah, exactly. A global 80 hertz crossover, or leave it where Audyssey sets the crossovers. Now, I know Tom will say 80
Yeah.
on all of it,
I mean,
right?
our general advice is if Audyssey sets it, okay, so let's be clear. Audyssey doesn't set the crossover. Audyssey feeds the information to the AVR manufacturer, and they decide what they want to do with that information. So let's blame Denon on this in this case. If the Denon during the automatic setup, which is part of Audyssey, sets the crossover lower than 80, generally, if you just manually raise that to 80, you're probably going to get the best results. It's not always 100% the case, but generally that's the case. But if the automatic setup set the crossover higher than 80 hertz, and it's not something crazy unreasonable, if it set it to 90 or 100 or something like that, chances are it's better to leave it there.
I'm trying to imagine what a manufacturer's logic is in setting it lower than 80
because
hertz.
People always want their speakers to play lower, because nobody besides people who listen to this podcast understands that bass is not uniform coming out of each individual speaker.
So people would be offended if told their speaker can't do 40 hertz.
That's right.
I see. Yes, because my front speakers, it did come back and go, oh, 40 hertz, be perfect. I'm like, nope, I was told 80.
They always set it as low as they can. That has been what they've done for ages.
Yeah. And they thought my 8-inch sort of fat bookshelf speakers were full range.
Sure.
Boy, it's like they're complimenting your speakers, and that's not necessary. A global 80 hertz crossover, or leave it where Audyssey sets the crossover.
Right. I said, if it went ahead in the auto setup and every single speaker was set to 80 or lower, then I'd go ahead and give it a global 80.
Right.
But if some of the speakers were set higher than 80 in the auto setup, I would probably leave them alone.
All right, so we have finished those questions. The lightning round is over. And moving on to, I'm going to pronounce this name incorrectly, Gurinder?
That's what we've been saying, and he hasn't complained.
All right. One reason Gurinder wants to make DIY backer boxes instead of just buying quiet boxes, that's brand name quiet boxes, is because making them himself would allow him to make an irregular shape that will fit around a gas line or a pipe above his drop tile ceiling. Interesting. Yeah. So as long as the internal volume ends up being the recommended 1 cubic foot, it doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle, right? And what matters is the internal volume, not however many layers of material or the outer dimensions. That's a darn good question.
Yeah,
it feels like that should be correct. The internal volume is
that is absolutely the case. Yes, we care about the internal volume of the box because, think about a speaker box, a regular cabinet speaker. Not all of those are perfect rectangles. Sometimes they're curved or angled or something like that, and they have components inside of them. They have a crossover in there. They've got a port, maybe a port tube is in there. There's bracing inside of there somewhere very often. So, excuse me, it's not as though the inside of a regular speaker cabinet is actually a perfect rectangle in there. It's got some things inside of there. So it's the same situation if you're making the backer box yourself for an in-ceiling speaker. Doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle, but we care about what the internal volume of air is in there. Right. Calculate it out. If that's about 1 cubic foot, it should work with the vast majority of in-ceiling speakers because that's what they target. But put some insulation in there, which is actually his next question. There you go.
And I'm just having a flashback to like late high school, the Crutchfield catalog. Everybody remembers the Crutchfield catalog, and they were selling subwoofers you could buy separately, and it would give the volume of a box.
Sure, yeah.
And me having a conversation with a guy who wanted to build a box to fill his trunk, and I'm like, no, it should be this volume. You need to measure. Aha, math. We actually need it. How about that?
It's not super complicated math, but it is a little bit of geometry, yeah.
Right. It's like, yeah, that's so it makes a difference, We said to insulate inside the backer box. Is Roxul safe and sound okay to use since he already has some on hand? I would guess yes.
Absolutely. Totally fine. Essentially any insulation will do. Yeah, so totally fine to use that. Yeah.
There you go. And that's all of Gurinder's questions. Moving on to Timotheus S.
I always said Timotheus because Timo is a fairly common name, but he was like, don't worry about that. Just call him Timothy. So apparently we have been butchering it. Apologies. We'll just say Timothy. And now you know who we're talking about.
I kind of like a Timotheus. It kind of looks like Timosius to me. Maybe I'm closer. I don't know. Hey, Timothy,
He didn't
I want
even
to say your
try
name right.
to tell us how to say it correctly, so I don't think we've been even remotely close. Apologies.
I like saying people's actual names
too.
actually correct. So if he wants to like pronounce it into a microphone
Exactly.
and send us a sound file,
Yeah.
we will say your
Little
name
sound
accurately.
bite.
All right, so Timothy's home theater is in his basement. It's a big open space and open to the upstairs, so it's a huge volume of open air. That happens for a lot of us. He has an SVS PC13-Ultra, and he would like to get a second sub. Obviously, he could pair it with the current PC4000 or PB4000, and that would be very close. But would there be any benefit to getting the PB16-Ultra? Would the extra headroom just go to waste? Now, we've talked about pairing up subwoofers that aren't exactly the same and what difference that makes, and usually it's okay, but you might not get that perfect balance in the room at the very lowest frequencies that one sub can do and the other can't.
Yeah,
right?
in this situation, the likelihood is that the additional output capability of the PB16 Ultra would likely largely be going to waste. You want to level match your subs. Now, when you are level matching your subs, you're level matching them at your seating location. And occasionally that will mean that one of the subs has its volume dial higher than the other one. That could be the case. It very often is. It's usually not worlds apart. It's usually, 2-3 decibels at the most difference. But then again, the PB16 Ultra has somewhere in the range of about 4, maybe 4.5 decibels additional output compared to the PC13 Ultra. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that when you go to level match your subs, that you could actually make use of the additional headroom of the PB16 Ultra. But the likelihood is that if your PC13 Ultra is topping out, well, it's topped out. That's as far as you go. And having a second sub that can continue to play an additional 4.5 decibels louder isn't really going to be of a lot of use, because the PC13 Ultra is just going to have stopped. And, it will refuse to go any louder than it's capable. It's almost always a case of lowest common denominator in terms of output and extension.
Right.
Extension isn't vastly different between these two models, so it's not going to be the type of situation where one of them more or less stopped playing at like 35 hertz while the other one continued down below 20. It's not that scenario at all. The PC13 Ultra is a very, very capable subwoofer in terms of extension. So what I would tell you, since the PC4000 or the PB4000 is less expensive than the PB16 Ultra, unless your plan is down the road to get a second PB16 Ultra, and it might be, but unless that's the plan, I would get the one that more closely matches what you already have. The chances of you genuinely getting to use that additional output while the PC13 Ultra cannot play any louder at all is very, very low.
See, I like that on a regular basis we're saving people money.
I try to.
And reeling them back and making them chill out. You don't necessarily need that. I like that. I like that a lot. Moving on to Daniel W. Daniel has seemingly permanent image retention / burn-in on his B6 OLED. Ooh. So he decided to get a Samsung Q90T QLED to replace it. But after only 2 days, he returned it. What we've said about getting used to an OLED, and then trying to go back to an LCD is absolutely right. It wasn't even just the pure black levels, which were actually quite impressive on the Samsung. The OLED just looks better. Yeah. So he wound up buying a C9 OLED. Yeah. What he did this time is purchase an extended warranty that covers burn-in. So that is now his advice to anybody else. Boy, can I relate. Now that we have our OLED, the 65-inch LG OLED, everything else doesn't look like an OLED.
Yeah.
And that's what everything is judged against. And virtually every LCD I see looks like poop compared to an OLED. So super spoiled.
It really
over
is
here.
that intra-scene and literal pixel beside pixel contrast that no LCD can match. When you're saying the best LCDs out there have an intra-pixel contrast of like 7,000 to 1 versus literal infinity to 1 on an OLED. It's like
that's it. It's that crispness that cannot be beat.
Yeah.
It's insane. If you like sci-fi and you're watching a lot of star field effects in the background, that sort of thing, yeah, you can't touch it. So I hate that he got burned in, but I understand this feeling. Okay, so he is going to connect the burned-in B6 in his theater along with his Epson 5050 UB projector as a casual display. But he would like to be able to feed it Dolby Vision while the Epson can only do HDR10. When he has them both connected to his Marantz SR7013, it will only send out HDR10, no Dolby Vision. So is there a switch or a matrix switcher that will let him send Dolby Vision to the OLED while HDR10 goes to the Epson, or does he need an HD Fury device? HD Fury device?
Yeah, short answer is an HD Fury device is what you're going to need to do this. And some people might be saying, hey, Rob, it was either last episode or the episode before where I said you can kind of not worry that much about Dolby Vision. At that time, I was talking about a Sony OLED, which that particular model has a known issue where it doesn't really show Dolby Vision correctly. So I was saying in that instance, hey, let's not worry about it. And with most LG OLEDs, I would say don't really worry about it because they have dynamic tone mapping that I think does a really good job of keeping all the detail there, even when you're only watching HDR10. But he has a B6, and the B6 was the one model year prior to the dynamic tone mapping being added to LG OLEDs. That came along with the B7 and the C7 the following year.
All right.
So I can understand that when you have Dolby Vision, that is going to be the best looking HDR that you can get on a B6. So yeah, if you want to retain that, you would have to get one of the HD Fury devices, one of the ones that handles the whole Dolby Vision side of things. So that's not their cheapest devices. You're going to be looking at, what is it? I think... Well, I better say Vertex while I'm thinking off the top of my head. The Vertex for sure can do it. You don't need their most expensive one, which is the Diva. You don't need everything that can do. So you can get the Vertex. I'm not sure if the Integral 2 does it or not. Just check the specs on HD Fury's website, but the Vertex for sure would do this for you.
There you go. Moving on to David B. David's theater room is about 14.5 feet by 17 feet by 9 feet, but it is open at the rear left and sound definitely escapes and can be heard throughout the rest of the house. And by the way, David sent some sharp-looking pictures. I like his dimensional arrows that match the angles. That's people are pretty clever that send us pictures and SketchUps and stuff like that. So we're seeing his open back left.
That's right.
Looks like a double door.
Yeah,
size
if there were doors, it would be like French doors, but there are no doors attached. Yeah.
Right. Okay, he has an SVS PB12 Plus in the front left corner, and he's thinking he'd like to get a second sub. With the room having that opening, he's leaning towards a PB4000. But what do we think he should get? Is there any reason not to get, is there any reason a less expensive one?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of actually similar to the previous question. Would you be getting benefit by, so in this case, the current model in SVS's lineup that would be closest to your PB12 Plus would be the PB3000. That's the PB3000 can actually play a little bit louder than your PB12 Plus, but that's the closest model that they have. So if you're going for what is the most similar like for like, it would be the PB3000, which would save you some money over the PB4000.
Right.
So this is a similar question of, would it be worth your while to get a model that can play, in this case, about 3.5 decibels louder than your PB12 Plus, but you have, I mean, I'm sure he's thinking because he has this open volume of air. But he also mentioned, hey, yeah, the sound leaks out of this room as it is. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're not pressurizing the whole house, and there's no way you're doing it. So just don't worry about it.
Even louder, and again, you are essentially limited to the weakest link in the chain. You're going to be topping out where your PB12 Plus stops. You're not going to be going tremendously louder than what it can already do. So I would recommend you save a little bit of money and step down to the PB3000.
There you go. That sounds perfect. If he has dual subs, how should he get the audio signal to the second sub? Is there a wireless option we recommend? Can it still work if his first sub remains wired? I suppose that's entirely possible.
Yeah. Yes. There's a couple of things here. So first of all, if you just want a wireless connection, which is totally reasonable, you don't want to, route a cable all the way around your room or something like that. Maybe it's difficult to do. The wireless solution that I like to recommend most because their signal is always rock solid, never had any issues with this particular model, and I like the form factor because I don't like the ones that are all like USB dongle style and then you got to plug that into power somehow. No, this one looks like a normal little device with a little antenna on it and a normal power plug, and that is Outlaw's OAW4. Now, it's $130 to get the transmitter and receiver together, and then an additional receiver to add on. I think it is exactly half the price. I think it's $65. It might be $70 to add an additional receiving device if you want to do, more than one. But that's the one I like to recommend. There are cheaper alternatives out there for sure, but I'll mention that one as my favorite. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. If you just want to do the simplest, you could just get 2 wireless receivers because the transmitter can send to more than one receiving device, and just have both of your subs connected wirelessly, even though one of them is physically close enough to run the wire. But if you want to run the wire to one of them and then wirelessly to the other, if you're doing what we recommend with a dual subwoofer setup, you're still going to just use a Y splitter on one subwoofer output of your AV receiver. One half of that Y splitter will just be a wire going to your existing sub that's close by, and the other half of that Y splitter will go to the little wireless transmitter. Now, when you go to do the phase knob adjustment, if you're following my whole 12-step guide, and you're going to have to because you don't have an enclosed rectangular room, right? You can't just put your second sub in the right rear corner and have confidence that you're going to have uniformity because you've got this permanent opening, a large permanent opening, and you don't have an enclosed rectangular room. So if you're doing the whole phase adjustment, it's going to be the same procedure. In effect, it's no different. It's just that there is some latency being added by the wireless signal. In the case of the Outlaw, it's quite low, but it's still about 10 milliseconds, which would translate to a distance setting of 10 feet or so.
10 more, so it thinks it's 10 feet farther away.
It thinks it's 10 feet farther away, yeah. So the practice of what you will do of adjusting the phase knob in the dual sub setup is no different. It's still trial and error. It's still just trying to find the most uniform in the repeating bass sweep that's playing. But yeah, that would be the effect. You absolutely can have one wired and one wireless.
But hey, you can change that phase and everything on that SVS 3000.
Yes,
with
you
the app.
can. You can change it with using the app on the PB3000.
And good luck if you do the 12-step program, because afterwards you're going to need a 12-step program as therapy. I'm super cheap. I would pull the carpet up away from the tack strip and run a wire behind the tack strip and push the carpet back down.
That is also doable.
There appears to be no reason he can't do that around the side of the room.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I'm thinking that, he's got the one opening, but the wire doesn't have to go across that opening. It can go around long way around the room.
It can go the long way around depending on where it ends up, and it's probably going to end up somewhere on the right side of the room.
Possibly. Maybe he was going to have it in the back corner next to the entrance. Might be, but even then, a long RCA cable is not expensive, so...
No, and it's not too hard to pull up and push back down carpet. I've done it plenty of times in apartments and stuff like that. The room is carpeted, as I say, but he would like to add some acoustic treatments. He was thinking of starting with 6 panels from either GIC or Acoustimac, 2 panels on each side wall and 2 panels on the back wall. Is that enough to start? Should he get more? And any particular reason to choose GIC over Acoustimac or vice versa. So, anything's good to start. And I would always start on those first reflection points on the side. So that sounds good to me.
Yeah, certainly, typically the wall behind you is a key place. He's got some distance. He's got 4.5 feet from the back of his seat to the back wall. So at least he's not right against his back wall. But that is a very flat, very bare back wall that he has right now.
Yeah,
and so, yes, having panels on the back wall behind you, a wonderful idea. Yes, he has hard, flat, reflective side walls, so that makes sense. At some point, I would probably add a couple of panels on your front wall behind your front speakers, although I'm not... I think they're actually in his entertainment stands, lying sideways beneath his TV. I think that's actually where his bookshelf speakers are, but you might pull that entertainment cabinet a little bit forward and just kind of put a panel all the way along the back there so that it's behind your center and left and right and all that. What I might add in his room that's a little bit unusual is he has an angled portion of a ceiling on his front. And anytime you have an angle on your ceiling, it does tend to contribute some odd reflections to your room. And I might go ahead. What I might do in his case is actually just like put insulation pretty much all along the angled part of his ceiling and then just cover it with fabric myself. So that it's
just make it
DIY.
one big panel.
Yep, make that whole angled thing one big panel. Other than that, though, I think you got a really good plan in place, starting with the back and the sides. It's totally fine to start with that and potentially add some more later. Like I say, I'd probably do that angled part of your ceiling, and that would be about all I would, really say that you need to do in here. Whether you go GIC or Acoustimac, well, GIC for the most part always includes a air gap behind their panel. They have some that are just 2 inches thick. It's just the insulation directly against the wall. But then most of their other panels, they're 242 or 244. Those are actually deeper than those quoted dimensions might make you think. When they say a 242, that's a 2 foot by 4 foot by 2 inches of insulation, but the panel is actually like 3.5 inches deep because they put a 1.5 inch air gap behind it.
Right.
So if the depth is of a concern to you, make sure you're aware that over at GIC, when they say they're giving you a 2 inch or a 4 inch panel, that's 2 inches or 4 inches of insulation plus a 1.5 inch air gap in most cases. Right. Acoustimac it's just the insulation, no air gap built in right against the wall. Their methods of hanging their panels are different. GIC basically just uses picture wire. So you're just going to put in what you would use to hang a picture. It's very easy, but some people are like, it's always, it's a little thing to get it perfectly level and all that.
Yeah, it leans a little bit out at the top.
A little bit out, yeah. Whereas Acoustimac just uses Z-clips. So those ones, you're going to have to screw the, first part of the clip into the wall, 2 of them, and then it hangs on the Z-clips.
And you got to be careful to get them level.
Get them very level, yeah.
The first time.
So with the GIC, if it isn't level when you first hang it, it's just like a picture wire, so you can level it. Right. Whereas the Acoustimac, you want to be real careful putting those Z-clips into your wall because you got to get them level the first time.
Yeah. Ooh, I would not want to worry about that. And I do encourage everyone thinking about anything to absorb sound. You'd be surprised what would absorb sound. Don't overthink it.
That's true.
Like, I mean, all kinds of things make a huge improvement. Thick curtains.
If it's thick and pleated, then it's working as an absorber. What I don't want people to think is you just put up like a thin little sheer curtain that's pulled, with very little ripples in it. It's like
a bed sheet doesn't do it. But I can tell you from experience that a bedspread or a comforter, as ugly as it is, works great.
Oh yeah, a comforter will work for sure. It's got some thickness
Back
to it.
in the college radio days, we had a production situation in a bedroom, and that's what was on the wall. It looked terrible, worked great. All right, so moving on to Ben F. Can the new PC2000 Pro be placed on its side like the older cylinder subs? And if you do, what would we suggest for decoupling it from the floor when it's on its side? He'd like something that looks a bit nicer than a folded up blanket.
Fair enough.
For a PC 2000 Pro. Interesting.
So you definitely can place it on its side. Now that it has it's hard to say a cylinder has a rear, but where the amplifier plate is, we'll call the rear of the cylinder, and it has therefore a rear firing port now, whereas like the old cylinders, the ports actually fired out the top. So you really didn't have to worry about putting it on its side and having a port. But as long as you don't have the port like aimed at the floor so that the port is completely blocked. You have and I don't know why you would, because the amplifier plate is back there too. So you're going to have it rotated so that the amplifier plate and the port have access to some air. And that's all you need. You absolutely can still put it on its side. Now, my actual suggestion for what I would use as a damping device is when they ship it to you, it comes with some foam ribs that hold it in its shipping carton. And I would be like, it's got foam ribs. So I'm going to take half of those foam ribs and use those to hold my subwoofer sideways.
That's some good DIY. You could probably cover it with something else if you wanted a different look.
You could put a little fabric over it. You could drape fabric over the whole thing with the subwoofer sitting side, lying on its side. You could just have fabric kind of draped over the whole thing if you wanted to. But that's honestly what I'd use the shipping ribs that come with it. They're perfect.
I love that idea. I like the inexpensive DIY. See, every place you can save money allows you to buy the better equipment. That's what I think. I'm always approaching stuff in that same way. Regarding Rob's god-awful 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers.
Thanks.
That's not what he said. That's what I said. I added a couple of words there. Regarding the 12-step program for subwoofers, if you do have an enclosed rectangular room and you can put the two subs in diagonally opposite corners, do you still have to do the whole trial and error phase knob thing?
You shouldn't have to.
If you're perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
You shouldn't
If you have an enclosed rectangle and you can get the subs directly across the room from another, the midpoints of opposing walls or diagonally opposite corners, then you shouldn't have to. The math says you shouldn't have to. If you want to drive yourself crazy and still try it, nothing's going to be able to stop you. But mathematically, you shouldn't have to. That's the joy of having an enclosed rectangle for a room.
If you have a perfectly symmetrical room and your seating is right in the middle and you can measure and put those subs exactly in do it. Just do it. Skip the 12 steps. 0-step guide to setting up dual subs.
No, it's
build a perfect
the first
rectangle.
4 steps out of the 12 steps guide, which I mentioned in the 12-step guide. I'm like, only if your room is not a perfectly enclosed rectangle do you need the rest of these steps.
Right. The 12 steps are fair. You wrote them well. It's just not a pleasant experience. Alrighty then. Terry G. Terry likes Atmos. A lot of us do. But he would like it to sound even better. We're always chasing that magic, aren't we? His room is 19 feet 9 inches long, with the back row 3 feet from the back wall and the front row 5.5 inches front of that.
5.5 feet in front of that. Yeah.
5.5 feet. I'm sorry, I'm going blind.
Yeah, that'd be a heck of a thing. Second row, 5.5 inches in front of your.
Well, you got to
scoot
just barely. All right. So, and the front row is 5.5 feet in front of that. I don't know why I saw inches. I guess because I saw inches before. He is using all golden ear speakers, and he has a pair of their angled HTR 7000 in-ceiling speakers 4 feet in front of his front row, and a pair of the Invisa 650 in-ceiling speakers firing straight down directly above the back row. Terry actually makes use of both rows of seats, as he prefers the larger or smaller field of view depending on the content he's watching, so he moves around. He tried various label combinations for his 4 Atmos speakers and settled on front heights and top middles as what he thought sounded best. But when he sits in the back row, the front heights seem so far away that it's like there's a hole in the space in front of him. And when he sits in the front row, he'd like to have sounds coming down directly overhead. So the obvious answer seems like having 6 overhead speakers, but that would mean an expensive receiver upgrade to a model that can do at least 13 channels. So what do we think of the idea of adding another pair of in-ceiling speakers in between the 4 speakers he has already, and then just wiring them in series with the existing top middles until he can save up enough for a 13-channel receiver? Is that too crazy? Man, everything in this world is crazy. And which model of in-ceiling speaker should he use if he does it? So he just doesn't like it. It seems too far away when he sits in the back row. Is that what we're getting at?
With the proposal, that's not really going to change. What he would gain out of this proposal of adding a pair of speakers directly above his front row, so right now he's got a pair of speakers that are 4 feet in front of his front row, a pair that's directly above his back row, but nothing directly above his front row.
I see.
So if he were to put a pair of speakers directly above his front row, but then for the time being, have them wired in series with the speakers that are directly above his back row, so that they are both playing the top middle channel.
I'm picturing it better now.
Yeah. Then that's not going to change his experience in the back row, other than the top middle sounds are now going to be coming from both directly above and 5.5 feet in front of him. But it's not going to make the front height sounds magically move closer to him when he's in his back row. But what it should do is make it sound more like sounds are coming from directly above his front row when he's sitting in the front row. So I'm not like super against this. Like, for example, if you have a quite large theater and you do an Oro 3D setup with that Voice of God channel,
Right.
It's only one channel up there, and in a small theater, you'd only have one speaker playing it. But in larger rooms, they'll actually put in like 2 or 4 speakers that are all sharing that one Voice of God channel directly above. Because if you have 2 or 3 rows of seats, it's not going to sound like it's directly above every one of those seats if you only have one speaker up there. So this notion of having more than one top middle speaker, it's not crazy. I don't think that's insane. And if the idea is that eventually what you'll have is top fronts, top middles, top rears, and using all 6 of those overhead speakers for separate channels, I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that's nuts. Just don't.
No, it actually makes some sense.
Just don't expect the back row experience to significantly change. That's all.
Right, so he already has angled in-ceiling speakers up for his front.
Which I'm fine with that, because Golden Ear are quite directional. So they're one of the ones where if you have the angle built in for the ones that are, a ways in front of you, that actually does make quite a bit of sense in the case of Golden Ear. But for the adding 2 more speakers directly above your front row, those should be firing straight down at your front row. So you would get another pair of the Invisa 650s that you have directly above your back row.
Not too crazy.
No.
Not too crazy until you get a big 13-channel hoss of a receiver.
And, the Denon 6700H is coming out like right around now, $2,500, which is still a lot of money, but not the $4,000 that it used to cost. So, to get to 13 channels. So
maybe think about that for Christmas.
It could be happening sooner than he thought.
There you go. All right. We are finally to new questions.
That's always
for this
the way
week.
it is. An hour in, here we go.
Here we go. Now the show's really getting started. So, Nathan W. has a question for this week. Nathan was entertained by our response to asking about using Room EQ Wizard for Rob's 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, but at the moment he does have time on his hands, so he'd like to torture himself.
Yes, Tom was saying, you've got to be single, you got to have no friends, you got to have no prospects, and this is all you have to do is Rob's 12-step guide, which I think Lee would probably agree with that assessment.
If your situation is utterly hopeless, or if you happen to be doing a review and you're afraid not to do it,
but Nathan's like, hey man, I do have time on my hands, so let's try it.
I mean, if you just want to, it's not the worst thing in the world that could happen to you, I suppose.
If you're okay with trial and error and some tedium, that's all we're really talking about.
Yeah, it's a very Zen-like activity, I guess. If he turns the phase knob a little, measures across 3 seats, then moves the phase knob a little more. Oh man, I'm just having flashbacks. Yep. Rinse and repeat. What would he be looking for in the graphs ideally? He gets that the goal is to find uniform results in all 3 mic positions, but is he also hoping to find the most linear response too?
Oh man.
Now, he has graphs, which I did not.
Right.
And so, my advice to somebody doing this is, as you told me, and as we've said before, if you're doing it by ear, you are not going to suddenly go, aha!
Right. No, you are not.
That's it. I moved it 5 degrees and ta-da! It doesn't work like that.
Nope.
And so don't wait for it. Don't think that's going to happen. Now, he's saying he's looking at graphs.
Yes.
Room EQ Wizard.
Yeah.
So what's he going to see? Is there something he can look for to just go absolutely insane and get it perfect?
Yeah, well, that's the danger, and that's why I don't have that written in the 12-step guide.
Right.
Mainly because I didn't want people to have measurement equipment to do this, because not everybody is willing or able to do that. But also, you can really drive yourself to craziness, because if you have it in your mind that it must be completely uniform, I mean, you might literally never get there.
No, probably not.
So he's done this in 2 stages. So what I wrote in the guide will always apply. If you measure across your 3-seater couch and the results are actually really close to uniform, but all 3 seats contain a basically outright null or like a super deep dip at some particular frequency, it's like, yeah, you got uniformity, but you have this one incorrectable frequency that's got a full-on null in it, which I have written in the guide. It's like, at that point, you need to keep looking, because you don't want to settle on one that has a full-on null going on, or a giant dip. That's not really not going to be EQable. But what I wouldn't recommend is, okay, I measured across a 3-seater couch. I got you're looking for pretty darn close. And okay, let me put it in figures. I'm talking within a plus minus, I'm going to go as far as saying like a plus or minus 4 decibel range, meaning like an 8 decibel difference, right?
Oh,
I
okay.
think that's in the bass, that's entirely acceptable. In fact, a 10 decibel difference is probably entirely acceptable. Our ability to hear that in the deep bass is pretty poor. But for the sake of, the type of audience we're talking to, I'm going to say like a plus or minus 4 decibel difference. But what we're looking for is that the overall shape of the graph in all 3 seats is the same. We're not having one seat going up while another seat is going down. If that's what you have, you got to continue looking. But if you have all 3 seats are going up and down in the same frequencies, some of them are going up and down a little more at a given frequency than another, but we're talking within an 8 decibel window from the most to the least. That's uniformity. You're there. You're going to be able to EQ that and get pretty darn linear response after EQ in all 3 of your seats. And that's our goal. But if you drive yourself to saying, well, not only did I find reasonable uniformity, I'm going to continue looking until I find the most reasonable uniformity and linearity. I mean, you're going to just be looking forever and ever. If you have no huge dips in your response, no outright nulls, no huge dips, and you achieved that sort of plus minus 4 decibel uniformity, stop there. Your EQ is going to be able to deal with that. That's as far as you need to go.
Yeah, I think part of what made it so difficult for me when I did this with the 2 SVS subs that I now have was that I got lucky.
Right.
And it really was, I got really lucky in the placement. It was already very close within 3 decibels according to my receiver.
Yeah.
And so trying to make it better, I was losing my mind. But yeah, I can see, and plus, your receiver is going to correct for small.
Oh yeah,
problems.
But what you can say from having the firsthand experience doing it is that when you were adjusting the phase knob, you got it worse. Right?
Oh, I could, if you made a dramatic adjustment, I was going, okay. I know I'm not insane.
Yeah.
This is doing something. That was weird right there. I could move my head all around.
If you had been, I mean, I don't know whether you'd consider this luckier or more unlucky, but if you had started at one of the bad points, if that had been the starting point, and then you had been doing the adjustments and it got better and better, then you would have been oh, this 12-step guide makes a heck of a lot of sense. You just happened to start where you basically wound up again at the end.
Yeah. I started at an ideal place somehow.
And all you could really do was make it worse. So
Right.
But imagine that had been flipped. Then you would have been saying, oh, this is really valuable.
Yeah, exactly. So again, the 12-step program is useful. It is valuable. It is just pain and suffering.
But if you happen to be like Lee and you start off at a place where you're like, hey, it's all going up and down in the same spots, and one of them, it's like 3 decibels more up than the other, but it's like, if that's where you began, you're like, oh, I lucked out. I'm already done.
Yeah. If your graph is a bumpy road and not the Rocky Mountains, then it's probably fine.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Manuel T. Manuel is in the market for a new computer monitor, but a lot of models seem to be sold out at the moment. He'd like to be able to use it with his PS4 and Xbox One, as well as the PS5 and Xbox Series X when they come out. 27 inches or 32 inches, and he'd like to keep the price below $300 if possible. Okay, you're not going to get any good HDR, that's for sure. I don't think at that price range, no sizes.
No, getting HDR. So, I mean, I will mention whenever you're talking about monitors, I like to refer people to displayhdr.org.
Okay.
That has the list of all of the display HDR certified products, which when you're talking computer monitors, that's what we're looking for is display HDR certified. And you want to make sure that if you're going to get an HDR computer monitor, that you get at least a HDR 600, a display HDR 600 certified display. Because the ones below that they will accept an HDR signal, but they aren't capable of actually showing it to you very well at all. So display HDR 600 is where you want to start. So I'm sure as Lee has seen, I picked out a model that is not HDR because to hit the price point, although right now it's saying currently unavailable. So when I put the link in there, it was available. This was just at Amazon. You can probably still find this model elsewhere. But more or less, I'm going to still recommend that anyone who's looking for a really good computer monitor that'll look good with video game systems coming in through an HDMI port, I'm going to point you to a Samsung. Samsung is it's not the only game in town for VA type LCD monitors, but they're certainly the most widely available who uses the VA type. And the difference in contrast from either a TN type or an IPS type computer monitor, which are IPS is the most common right now, the difference in contrast going to a VA panel is it's so darn visible that I find it difficult. And look, it's a computer monitor. You will be sitting directly in front of it. I'm not worried about the off-axis viewing of a computer monitor. I'm like, it's a pretty odd situation that you're going to be sitting way off angle to a computer monitor. So go for one that's a VA type panel. So Samsung's LC, in this case 27, to get the price close to where he wanted, the 27-inch model, the FG73 series. So that is not HDR. But to get the price point, you'd have to step up to like $450 to get the HDR version of this. It's a 1440p resolution, so it's not 4K, but or actually, you know what? No, the FG73 series is 1080p, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 1080p. But it is 144 hertz, so that's nice to have for in your gaming monitor.
It's good, quick response. Got 144 hertz. That's all cool.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of curved screens at all, especially when they're smaller.
It's a mild screen and you're right in front of it. Yeah.
If it was an ultra-wide, gigantic thing, maybe I'd get a curved screen.
They have those too.
For 27 inches,
it's a mild curve on these. I'm going to live with it to get the better VA type panel. So yeah, but in essence, if you kind of just look for a Samsung, you're going to be in pretty good stead. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're down under $300 for something the 27 or 32-inch size, at that point, just stick with the good brand names and do look for the gaming features of the higher refresh rates.
Yeah.
Don't get a 60 hertz monitor if you can help it. Look for that fast millisecond response
I do
time.
like Samsung's CHG70 series. That is the one that is Display HDR 600 certified. If you can stretch your budget up to that, I think it's worth it. It's a really good looking display as far as, like value wise. Is it the best display ever? Of course not. But, value wise, I think it's a really good choice, but it would be over $300 for sure.
All right. Moving on to David S. David has a 1080p LG OLED. So it's one of the older ones. It's a 55-inch curved model. He'd like to upgrade to a larger size, and his wife would really like to get rid of the curve. Good for the wife.
Yes, we are in agreement.
Look who's agreeing with Lee. But he isn't sure exactly which model to get. B8 versus B9 versus BX, as well as the C9 and CX are all options. One thing that really concerns him is that he uses several streaming services, and some, like FX, seem to be pretty low quality. Now, that's not the TV's fault, I don't think. Lots of posterization, color banding, and macro blocking. That's bad compression. And really bad-looking dark images and shadow detail. He knows it's mostly the source to blame, but at the same time, some TVs do a better job of cleaning that stuff up than others. So he wants to make sure he's getting the best OLED model as far as that goes. He'll be doing some gaming as well, but he doesn't mind if the TV lacks variable refresh rate and the highest HDMI 2.1 bandwidth. As long as he can do 4K 60 with HDR, that's fine. Which model do we suggest?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go one model year before the ones that he mentioned, all the way back to the B7, just to explain the sort of advantages and changes that came along the way. So back in 2017, when the B7 came out, that was the first year that they first of all released panels that could get up to about 700 nits. In the 6 series, they could probably get up to about 550 nits, and it was really the next year in the 7 series that they were getting up to like the 700 nit mark. So it was a change in the structure of the panels themselves. And then that was also the year in 2017 with the 7 series that they added dynamic tone mapping for HDR10, which to me was like a game-changing feature. But they hid turning dynamic tone mapping on and off within the dynamic contrast control in the settings in the 7 series. Really? You had to turn dynamic contrast to low, and that activated dynamic tone mapping. And it didn't work in the game mode. If you went into the game mode to get the lower input lag, you couldn't use dynamic contrast. You couldn't use the dynamic tone mapping.
Okay.
It had some little weird things with the black sometimes being boosted in the game mode for the 7 series, and you would see some additional noise down there. So the 2018, the 8 series, the B8, which is one of the models that he's considering, it improved on all of those things. The smooth gradation feature was also added. So the dynamic tone mapping that I was talking about, that got its own individual settings in the settings menu, its own individual setting that you could turn on and off. And then they added the smooth gradation feature, but they hid it within the MPEG noise reduction setting. And you had to turn MPEG noise reduction to low to turn smooth gradation on. But the B8 didn't have that. The C8 and up did. The C8, the E8, the G8, they had the smooth gradation hidden within the MPEG noise reduction menu, but the B8 didn't have it. So
that's something that's one of the very few complaints I have about the OLED is the banding.
Yeah.
You do notice it. And once you notice it, it's hard to stop noticing it. And depending on the type of content, on most movie content, you never see it. But if it's some sort of graphics or a sky background or something like that, you see it. And so I think I have a B9, right? So is mine underneath noise reduction
wasn't
low?
yours an 8?
I got an 8 at first and took it back.
You didn't get a 7 at first and take it back? I can't remember now.
No, it hasn't been that long. No.
Okay.
So it's just a year old now.
We can't remember what model Lee has, but if it's a 9, it should have the smooth gradation feature.
Should have a separate. Okay, I'll look for that again. again.
Yeah, so that's its own individual setting in there. But yeah, since he was saying the B8 was one of the options, so you won't have the smooth gradation feature, even though it was never its own separate setting within the 8 series. It was in the MPEG noise reduction, but you don't have it on the B8. You would if you got a C8 or higher in the alphabet in the 8 series. But the dynamic tone mapping did work in game mode now. The input lag got even lower, but the 8 series is the first year where we got this, we'll just call it the flashing problem, which is, so Vincentio over at HDTV Test, he coined his own term, which I think he called near black chrominance overshoot, which is a more technical term. Basically, it was only in the color channels. It wasn't in the black and white channel. It was only in the color channels where way down low, it would, for some reason, completely overshoot the luminance value that it was supposed to have in the color channels. And in dark scenes, you would sometimes get these little flashes on the screen, which people found quite distracting. Now, LG largely fixed it with a firmware update. They added some additional dithering down in the bottom, and they largely fixed that issue. But it did apply to the entire 8 series, including the B8, so there wasn't much of a difference there. So the smooth gradation feature is the one thing that you might really... He specifically talked about posterization and color banding. So the smooth gradation feature is not present in the B8. It would be present in the C8. Now, once we get to the B9 and the C9 and so forth, to me... if you can, those are the models to get, particularly if you're a gamer. Because the 9 series, all 4 of the HDMI inputs are full HDMI 2.1, 48 gigabits per second bandwidth on the 9 series, including the B9. They all have full variable refresh rate. They work with G-Sync, so you can connect it to your Xbox One X right now, or the forthcoming Series X, or the PlayStation 5, that we're all assuming will have variable refresh rate. It'll do all of that. They can take 4K 120. So as gaming displays, the 9 series is like head and shoulders above everybody else, basically. The brand new Sony X900Hs are getting a lot of those same features, but other than that, the LG OLEDs in the 9 series really have an advantage. They actually took a little step backwards with the current X. They want to say 10. They want to say it's the B10 and the C10, Roman numeral X. But yeah, the BX, the CX series, they actually took a little step backwards compared to what the 9 series had. So if you can go for a 9 series... that's giving you all the things. It's like all the things that you can get very much for gaming. That's the one to get. The B8 series, it would be a little step back. They improved on pretty much all the issues that anybody had with the 7 series, but it's just that the B8 doesn't get the smooth gradation thing. If you went to the C8, you would get that.
So yeah, get a C8 or a B9.
Pretty much,
is what we're
yeah,
coming down to for
pretty
him,
much.
especially for his specific complaint.
Yeah, but it's like if you got a B8, because he was saying he can find one for significantly less money. If you got a B8, just be aware you won't get the smooth gradation feature. But if you were worried about the experience you had with like a 6 or a 7 series, then pretty much all of those things were improved.
Right on. So there are our recommendations. His AV receiver is a Denon X4000, and he is sticking with a 5.2 speaker setup, but a new 4K HDR TV will make a new receiver necessary, and he wants the highest level of Audyssey, so X3500H from Accessories for Less. Would the X3400H be sufficient if he can find one?
Yes and yes, I would say.
Yeah. I don't know if that'd be a problem. Yeah.
Between the X3400H and the X3500H was, I think, the smallest difference I've ever seen in AV receiver models.
Yeah.
I think by the time the X3400H was done with its firmware updates at the end of its life, I don't know if there was any feature other than the 3500 had a dedicated phono input and the 34 didn't. So if you've got a record player, I guess you go for the 3500H. That's like it was literally like the one defining feature. The 3400H didn't have eARC when it came out, but they actually managed to add it with a firmware update, which I don't entirely know how they did it, but I guess the silicon was capable of doing it. So there's if you find an X3400H at like a steeply discounted price, that would be totally fine. But you can get the X3500H over at Accessories for Less right now, and that would be a fantastic choice.
Something funny to me that the step up model has a phono input.
Yeah. Well, it was the next year. Somebody buying the 3400 must have complained.
So yeah, why can't I hook up my turntable to this thing with Dolby Atmos? Well, I don't know. All right, moving on to Sean M. Sean M has a theater, bar, and gaming rec room that's about 22 feet by 26 feet in total, and it looks awesome. Visually, he can close off the theater area with a black curtain. He's running a 5.1.2 setup at the moment with 5 Klipsch speakers, 2 Emotiva in-ceiling speakers directly above his seats, and a Power Sound Audio V3600i subwoofer. Those are all being powered by a Yamaha RX V781 receiver and Emotiva XP-A5 amplifier. And his projection setup is a BenQ HT1075 with a 110-inch Elite Screens Spectrum Electric roll down. And it is just cool looking theater.
It's a cool looking space.
That's a fun party room right there.
Definitely
there is no doubt. Yeah. I'm going to watch a movie at his place. That just looks really fun. So as I scroll on past all
there are many photos,
pictures,
but yes.
That's right. And then we've got a nice little sketch of the setup here. He's thinking of expanding his Atmos configuration. He already owns a second pair of Emotiva in-wall speakers, and he was thinking he might change his dipole surrounds to monopoles. But should he stop at 4 overhead speakers or try for 6? With his seats against the back wall, he doesn't have space for surround back speakers. So is there even such a thing as a receiver that does 5.1.6? He is intrigued by the new Denon X3700H model, but would it make any difference if he saved some money and got the X3600H instead? I don't know that it would make enough of a difference, but 6 up there. What you think, Rob?
So in this setup where his seats are pretty darn close to his back wall, I don't think 6 overhead speakers makes any sense at all. You can't really have top rears or rear heights. No. I mean, even if he was going to tell us later that he's willing to move his seats forward, you'd have to move them significantly forward. You'd want to move them at least 4.5 feet forward, and I just don't see that being the case in the setup, the way that it looks, that he's going to be moving at a minimum 4.5 or 5 feet forward from where they are. So no, I would definitely in your setup stick with 4 overhead speakers. That's going to give you all the front to back and left to right panning that we're hoping to achieve with Atmos. And in your case, if what you want most is to notice sounds directly above you, you've already essentially got that with the 2 in-ceilings that you already have. So I would continue to call those your top middles, and I would put a pair of speakers in your ceiling about 4.5, 5 feet in front of the ones that you already have.
Sure.
You would label them as front heights since you're labeling the ones that you already have as top middles, but that's just the label. It's still going to work out just fine as far as moving the sounds around where you want them to be. As for the AV receiver, we mentioned this once before with the 3600 versus the 3700. It is the one in Denon's lineup where there is the significant difference is that, of course, the 3700 being the newest model has one HDMI 2.1 input.
Ah, yes. The infamous one barely better.
It is not an HDMI 2.1 switch in any way, but it has one HDMI 2.1 input. If you're going to continue using a projector as your display, there is no reason that you need that. Absolutely none. Even if you upgrade to a really nice 4K projector, none of them are doing, HDMI 2.1 stuff with 4K at 120 hertz and variable refresh rate and all that. So no, if projector is what you're using, you don't need that. And then there is the nice feature in the 3700H where you can store two completely different Audyssey calibrations and switch between them at the press of a button. But the 3600H, you can do it. It's just slower because you have to use the save and load function with a USB drive or using the app on your smartphone. You can still switch between multiple different Audyssey configurations on the 3600, but it just takes longer because you have to save and load instead of having two of them stored in the unit itself. So to me, it's not worth it to pay upwards of $500 or $600 more for the 3700. That doesn't make sense. Now, is there such a thing as a receiver that can do 5.1.6? In other words, it's not a 13-channel or a 15-channel model. It's still an 11-channel model, but instead of it being 7.1.4, it can reassign those to be 5.1.6. Well, we already said don't worry about doing 6 overhead speakers in your case. But there are no receivers that do that type of configuration. Not yet. Nobody's doing that yet. If you wanted to have 6 overhead speakers, you'd have to go for the 13-channel model, like the new 6700H, which can do that.
But look at us saving money for someone again and talking them down from,
I hope so,
from the very highest heights.
I mean, the other side, to put it bluntly, I think you would be disappointed if you installed 6 overhead speakers in your particular configuration.
Right. It's just not
I think you would be disappointed by the result and feel it hadn't been worth it, especially if you're paying $2,500 for a 13-channel receiver just to do that. I'm like, you're not going to feel like you got your money's worth.
Not at all. He has absorption panels on his back wall and his right side wall. The left wall is open with the curtain. Should he install panels on his ceiling? That's pretty much the only place he could add more panels. Should he? I wouldn't spend a ton to put anything up there. I don't think that's the worst of what's going on in this room.
Yeah, without having any measurement, I wouldn't just say a flat yes or no. What I would recommend, because it sounds like he wants to get into this stuff, if he's considering 6 overheads and all that type of stuff, grab yourself a calibrated measurement mic from Cross Spectrum Labs, get Room EQ Wizard, which is free software, and take yourself some waterfall plot measurements, including up into your mid-range and treble. Because what I would suspect, my suspicion in this room is that if there's anything in the way of more acoustic treatments that you could add and benefit in this room, it would actually probably be diffusion on your ceiling, not more absorption panels on your ceiling. There's a reasonable chance in this setup, in my opinion, that you're going to see some uneven decay times in the higher mid-range and treble, which would be taken care of by diffusion, not absorption. So if anything, you can get some pretty inexpensive diffusion panels. So if you just wanted to give it a go and see whether you like it or not, and you're willing to risk that money instead of putting some money towards a measurement mic, I wouldn't stop you from doing that.
It's not going to get worse, I would think. I don't think you can really hurt it by putting diffusion panels at the top. Right. So if that's in the budget, that'd be a perfectly good thing to try.
Yeah, that's where I would point you in here at this point.
Is it a good time to upgrade to a 4K projector? He really wants a JVC, but he'd have to wait and save up if he's aiming for an NX7. What about an Epson 5050UB or 5040UB? Or what about a BenQ HT5550 or HT3550? Is it the right time
Ah.
in general to go to a 4K projector?
Since we don't know what might be coming out at the end of the year, it's tough to, I mean, I really don't know. And even less than most years, because I'm like, this has been such an insane year.
And because of the situation.
Because of what has happened globally with, China was more or less shut down for a while there. Some R&D stalled, and projectors are on a odd upgrade cycle anyway. So I really don't know when the next batch will be around and what they'll even offer at that point. I really have no idea. I don't think it's a bad time to buy a 4K projector. I'll put it to you that way. If what you want most of all is a projector for gaming, then I would probably say, let's wait and see. Because if we do get a projector, I don't expect to see projectors with variable refresh rate, unless they're like the much less expensive ones that are targeted at gamers. I don't know if JVC is going to do that or Epson's going to do that. I have
probably not.
I have some doubts, but 4K 120, that's a possibility. Something that does 4K 120, that I could see happening in the higher end. So what I would kind of say, I don't think it's a bad time to buy. If you can't afford a JVC at all, try to get the Epson 5050 UB. It is the absolute obvious less expensive alternative to the JVCs. Because the Epson 5050 UB is so close in price to BenQ's HT5550, I see no reason not to get the Epson. It's superior to that model in a number of ways, so I would get the 5050 UB all day long. I know the 5040, if you can still track one down, can be nice and affordable, but you are giving up the ability to do 4K 60 with HDR with that model. So again, if gaming is in here, I would go for the 5050. Because
I would at least want the 4K 60, if nothing else than just really good streaming of 60 hertz programming. There's a lot of that on YouTube.
Exactly.
But yeah, if it's gaming, also consider the fact that if you get into 4K gaming, you better be buying the top end computer systems or the very latest consoles to even be able to do it. So
an Xbox One X is pretty affordable now, so that that could be what you're connecting to it. But what I would say, the only last thing on this topic is that don't sleep on the JVC NX5. If you can get your budget to where the NX5 is, and quite a few places that are selling NX5s are discounting them because nobody wants them. Everybody wants the NX7. And I know everybody's looking at the NX7 and the stated contrast is higher. And the stated wide color support is wider, and everybody's like, so if I'm gonna do that, then let's go for it. Let's get the NX7. It's got an actual physical color filter that comes in and widens the color. Okay, the NX5 without the physical color filter already gets you to 94% of DCI-P3. All right.
That's really good.
And it's really good. The contrast, why is the stated contrast of the NX7 approximately twice as much as the NX5? Well, it's because absolute black on the NX7 is 0.02 or 0.02 nits, and on the NX5 it's 0.04.
So that's where statistics gets weird. That's where math. That's where math gets a little weird. That's right. Technically by math,
it's twice the contrast. You're dividing it by a number that's half as much. Don't sleep on the NX5. It's a heck of a projector.
All right. He is 13 feet from his current screen. Would upgrading to a 135-inch screen size make sense?
As far as field of view goes, yes. If you are 13 feet from a 135-inch screen, you're at a 41.5 degree field of view, really close to that. Right now, with your 110, if you're 13 feet from eyes to screen, you're at a 34.2 degree field of view. So field of view wise, it totally makes sense. I just question a little bit the logistics, because he's got a nice, speaker arrangement that's already in here. And so, what would go into that screen size mean that, the top of the screen's right up to your ceiling and it's maybe below.
Well, there's the door. There's the little door there to the right of the screen.
There's a door to the right. There's a little nook to the left. So just make sure it's physically going to fit. But going to a larger screen size at a 13-foot seating distance, as far as field of view goes, completely makes sense.
Be fine. Maybe there's something you're going to have. Here's where math is going to help. Yeah, measure and see. Is there a
Mhm.
120-inch screen?
Definitely.
Is there something in between? Yeah. He's got his projection screen. He also has two 50-inch TVs, one over the bar and another in the, quote, pub seat area. Then he has a covered patio with a cheapo 32-inch Insignia out there. It's completely unwatchable in the daytime as it cannot overcome the sunlight at all. He wants the outdoor TV to remain small and cheap. What's the brightest 32-inch TV for under $200? And we're going with a Samsung recommendation again.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to point you at Samsung again. Now, I didn't get you to under $200. It's
awful close,
I got
though.
you to 220, and I'm thinking that that's close enough. But yeah, they're N5300. It's actually a current model, 32-inch there. Yeah, Samsung is kind of smoking everybody as far as reducing glare on their screens and having at least somewhat decent brightness. Like, we're talking a screen that can get upwards of about 300 nits, but as far as 32-inch TVs goes, that's about as good as it gets right now.
Yeah, manufacturers are not putting anything special into smaller TVs anymore.
And if you look
Nothing
at the competing like TCLs and Hisense and Vizios, they're topping out at like 150 nits. So, you know, it's significant. It still might not be bright in sunlight. It's probably still not going to be bright enough, but it's going to be better than the Insignia that you already have is like 120 nits. So
I was just thinking what you need is this ancient 32-inch that I have. It's real thick and has full-on fluorescent lighting behind it. It's thick and it's old, but that son of a gun will get bright. It's 14 years old now. Just find someone selling something like that and throw it out there. Give them $50 for
what
it.
you can grab today, Samsung's N5300, $220 over at Best Buy.
Right on. Art B is our next questioner. What's the deal with Hulu not sending 5.1 audio when using an Apple TV? Man, the problems with and the differences between the streaming services and the devices you're using, and whether you're on a Chromecast or a Roku or an Apple TV.
Certainly not the hardware. The Apple TV is more than
perfectly capable.
I don't know. Hulu is owned entirely by Disney now, and yet Disney Plus, the Apple TV 4K was the only device at the beginning that could send Atmos from Disney Plus, the service. They've now updated that, so pretty much all the hardware that can play the Disney Plus app can put out Atmos now, as long as the hardware is capable of doing so. But yeah, they apparently haven't gotten around to updating Hulu. That's the only real explanation to it.
You know, I haven't even checked lately. A while back, I just set everything to be decoded into surround sound no matter what, because I got so sick of how many things came through as stereo. I used to leave it as straight through, like whatever I'm getting, I'm getting.
Sure.
But I went ahead and like, screw it. just decode it, do the best you can. Everything sucks now.
Yeah, we got to wait for Disney to decide that it's time to update the Hulu app on Apple TV. That's all you can do.
I don't understand why maybe they don't consider it to be enough Apple TV devices to hire people to make
You
those
know what
changes?
it really is? Whatever executive is making the decision doesn't watch a lot of Hulu at home. That's what it is.
Or doesn't have an Apple TV.
It's always the case that whatever they use at home, it gets the support.
Yeah, I believe you completely. All right, Brian F. and Eddie on Twitter. First up, Brian wanted to say that he only started getting into home theater as a hobby a couple of years ago when he bought his current house. He never expected TVs and speakers to become a hobby, but listening to us dive deep into details has been very enjoyable, and now home theater might even be his main hobby. It's certainly where a lot of his expendable cash ends up going.
I hear you.
I like the idea that he started listening to us before getting into it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think he was like getting into it while beginning to listen to us, but we encouraged him to continue. And now if it's become his main hobby, then it's gone along well.
Pushed him on into it. He's been running a 5.2.4 configuration after coming to the conclusion that 4 overhead speakers definitely sounds better than 2. His current Onkyo receiver tops out at 9 speakers, so this is as far as he can go with that model. But he won a pair of SVS speakers in a prize draw. Hey, he won SVS speakers. That's nice. So now he's thinking of expanding his speaker setup. This is definitely your main hobby.
Must use.
You definitely have this as a hobby now. And if he is going to end up expanding anyway, why not consider doing more than 11 speakers? I like where you're thinking. Maybe go 726 or 924. What would we say is the best configuration? Well, that always depends on your room.
It does. It certainly
And
does.
your setup and your budget and what you watch even.
Now, making the assumption that he has a fair amount of space behind at least his primary row of seats, enough that it would make sense to have top rears. I'm going to go ahead and make that assumption. If that is the case, because he was talking about he for sure wants to add surround back, so I'm going to use that as evidence that he has some amount of distance.
He must have some room
behind his primary seats. So you know what? I mean, given the way that he asked this question, I'm going to tell you what I think is the best speaker configuration.
Here we go. The best.
If you have the room for it, is 9.1.6. I think that is the best configuration. I think having both front wides and 6 overhead speakers is the best configuration.
Well, you're Captain Front Wide. We know that.
I know. Am I gonna tell you not to go 9 on your floor level? No. If you want the best, I'm gonna tell you to go 9 on the floor. And there is something to having speakers in front, behind, and directly above you. So 9.1.6. That's what I say is the best configuration.
The best. All right. Hey, go for it. If you have the budget. What are his options for going beyond 11 speakers? At one point, he was under the impression that just about any Atmos receiver had the option to add 2 more speakers via pre-outs, but now that he's reading up on it, it seems he's mistaken. So, is the Denon X8500H really his only option, or are there alternatives he should consider? Perhaps something with even better room correction. Boy, this is his hobby now. This is it. These kinds of questions, this man is hooked. And along similar lines, Eddie wanted to know which processor we would recommend for going beyond 11 speakers, and specifically asked what we think about the Acurus Muse processor as an option. All right, so Denon X8500H, is that his only option? Are there alternatives?
So,
something with...
If you were going to stop at 13 speakers, so you're going to stop at 9.1.4.
Why stop at 13, Rob?
If that were what you were going to do, then prior to very recently, the X8500H or the sister processor over at Marantz, which is the AV8805. So that one is just a processor. You have to have all external amplification. The Denon X8500H has 13 channels of amplification built into it. So you don't even need an external amp to power all 13 speakers. They were your only options at a semi-reasonable price point, but now they have announced the X6700H in the Denon lineup. That is a current 2020 model, and it can go up to 13 speakers maximum. So it can do a 9.1 or 9.2 with the 2 subwoofer outputs, but 9.1.4 channel configuration or a 7.1.6. You could choose either of those with your 13 speakers, but I said, let's go to 15 speakers, 9.1.6. And the best choice to me by a country mile is Monoprice's HTP-1. Now, it is a processor. It means you will need 15 external amplifiers. Okay? It is it is not a receiver. It has no amplifiers built in. Now, for Eddie, he was asking about processors. So this is exactly where I would point Eddie, is Monoprice's HTP-1. It's $4,000. It is not a cheap processor, but compared to every other processor that can do 9.1.6, it is pretty darn affordable. Unlike Emotiva, they actually have Dirac on it, not just a promise of Dirac, but actual Dirac you can use when you buy it. And the one caveat is that they don't include a microphone, but you head over to Cross Spectrum Labs and you get a UMic 1 for $105. So $41.05, I guess, is the real price by the time you get to there. But you can actually do all the things. Now, the other super awesome feature that the Monoprice Monolith HTP-1 processor gives you is we don't have DTS-X Pro yet. They're saying it's going to come. I'll believe it when I see it. So if you wanted to take any signal, upmix it to make use of all 9.1.6 speakers, we already know that like Dolby Surround Upmixer, it will never put any sound into your front wides. And the DTS Neural X Upmixer can only put sounds into 11 speakers maximum. When DTS X Pro gets here and DTS Neural X Pro gets here, we'll be able to upmix to all 15 speakers, but we can't do it today. But the Monoprice HTP-1 will itself use its own matrixing that they programmed to matrix in front wide and top middle sounds. So it will upmix to the 11 speakers, 7.1.4, and then it will matrix in top middles and front wides and put sounds into those speakers. So by a country mile, the Monoprice HTP-1, as far as directly mentioning the Acurus Muse, it's $5,500, so it's more expensive than the Monoprice, and all of its equalization is parametric only. They don't use fur filters, it's just a parametric EQ. So I think the HTP-1 has it beat by price and features.
Okay, there you go. And he says, since you seem to be a fan of that, would it be worth it if you're only running a 7.1.4 setup or even just a 7.1 setup without any overhead speakers at all? Would that HTP-1 still be worth it?
Now, that's really hard for me to say that it's worth the $4,000 price tag plus all external amps, because if the main thing that you're wanting to get is Dirac, then you could head over to NAD. To NAD, they have two models that can both do, two receiver models I'm talking about, that can both do 7.1.4. Now, they have 7 amplifiers built into both of those models, so you would need 4 channels of external amplification for a 7.1.4 setup, but that's a lot less than 11. And NAD has Dirac built in, so if that's the thing you're going for, I'd point you to NAD instead.
There you go. The HTP-1, highly recommended. You just have to decide if you're going full bore 15 speaker and Dirac or not. What part of these features are important to you? And if you've dove in and this is your life now, I don't see anything wrong with that Monoprice. Moving on though to Buddy L. At one point, Buddy gave his Infinity Quantum 5 speakers to a friend. That's a good gift. But now that friend had to downsize to a small apartment, and Buddy still loves those speakers, so the friend gave them back, and Buddy is using them in his bedroom. See, I understand about not wanting to give away stuff. Do you know the 50-inch plasma that I had? It's at my friend's apartment, and he doesn't even watch much TV, but I told him, I just need to store this at your apartment because I can't get rid of it. I love the old TV so much. So I get this. So his speakers went away and came back, and now they're in the bedroom. He used to have a Sansui G8000 paired with those Infinity speakers, but he doesn't have it anymore. And being a 40-year-old model, he doesn't plan on trying to track one down. He used to like its loudness control, and he's hoping there might be something available today that mimics that. And there is. He's currently powering the Infinity speakers with a spare JVC surround sound receiver in direct 2-channel mode, but it isn't giving him the experience he's looking for. He remains a fan of Yamaha. Me too. So do we have a model we would suggest to him? And yes, there are.
Yeah, so if anyone's wondering what the loudness control was, it was actually like one of the earliest attempts at what we would now call the curves of equal loudness, or what we describe with Audyssey dynamic EQ, or in the case of Yamaha, YPOW volume. Now, it wasn't as sophisticated because it wasn't following the actual Fletcher-Munson curves or the ones that Audyssey came up with themselves, full curves of equal loudness. It was more or less a smiley face in the
it was a boom sizzle.
In the EQ. It increased the bass and it increased the treble, but it did so dynamically based on how much you turned down the volume. So if you turned down the volume more, you would get even more of a smiley face, so that the bass would remain audible and the treble wouldn't disappear. So that was your old loudness control. Now, funnily enough, Yamaha, I'm assuming this is just a 2-channel setup that he's going for.
It sounds like it.
Now, the irony here is if you go for a Yamaha, and I have no problem recommending a Yamaha to you, because if you're already comfortable with that brand, I mean, their sound quality is excellent. They've got the features you're going to be looking for. But the irony is that you could actually get all the things you're after for a lower price by getting a Yamaha surround sound receiver, a 5.1 receiver, versus one of their dedicated 2-channel models. You could actually pay less. So, for example, the least expensive one I would recommend to you would be Yamaha's RXV 385. That's a 5.1 channel model, 70 watts per channel. And to get something similar to the loudness control, you would use YPOW volume. That's how they would do it now. Now, the thing about that is it's automatic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You would run the YPOW setup, you would activate YPOW volume. It might sound similar to what you were used to with a loudness control, but it might not, and there's no way for you to manually change that. Now, you could manually change the equalization in the Yamaha, because it has a full graphical interface for changing the
You
EQ.
very much can, yeah.
But that manual EQ is not dynamic. It's you set that
That's
once, and that's what it is. So I'm going to assume that he really wants an actual honest-to-goodness loudness control. That's what he talked about. And you can get that with Yamaha. Now, the least expensive one, Accessories for Less, actually has one of their N602, which is a stereo receiver. That's all it is. It's 2 channels. It's 80 watts a channel. But right on the front of it, it's got a loudness dial, like you very much remember.
I mean, it just straight up loudness. That's what he wants.
I'm pretty sure that's
I
what
know
he
what
wants.
he's talking about. I know the kind of sound he's talking about, and what that's exactly what he
And
wants.
over at Accessories for Less, it's $450, which that's not crazy. I mean, it's not cheap. It's not the $280 that you can get the RXV 385 for, but $450 to me is not utterly insane. Now, if you wanted,
No, it's not.
If you wanted both, if you wanted to have a loudness dial on the front and YPOW, because maybe you want to try out YPOW for the automatic setup and you want to be able to use YPOW volume, or at least give it a try. Well, there is the N803, which is the step-up stereo receiver model from Yamaha. It's $750, though. So, it's a pretty big price jump. That's Accessories for Less.
Can you get that in silver?
I don't know if you can get the N803
Because they
in silver.
show one in silver, but
could
it
be.
isn't available.
Not available right now,
immediately.
but it could
that
be.
would be great.
But those would be the models. I think you're probably gonna want to go for a Yamaha N602 or N803. The big difference between them being that the N803 has YPOW built into it. I'm betting he would
There you go.
maybe even prefer the 602. He doesn't sound like he's
I bet he
an
wants.
automatic EQ room correction guy.
You know what I love about that 602 and that 803 is the knobs on the front of those flat. They look like switches, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's reminiscent of old Yamaha design elements, like from long ago. I used to have a receiver that I inherited from my uncle, and he got it in like 1975, and the thing was gorgeous and silver and had, as selector switches, they looked like the knobs on the front of these you're suggesting to him. And I don't know, it's just a classic feeling. Don't underestimate how fun it is to have a beautiful looking receiver with the loudness control you want. He wants that 602.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm sure.
I think
I
that's
can
the
feel
one.
it. It's good looking. Matt G has some questions. On Rob's advice, Matt bought a 75-inch Sony X900F. It's a big size upgrade in his first 4K HDR TV, so he's excited. Excellent. He has it connected to a Marantz SR6012 receiver, and the only source he has that is capable of outputting 4K resolution is his Dish Hopper DVR, so he will mostly be using the TV's built-in apps, at least at first. And that's all I'm getting 4K on right now is just my TV's apps. If and when he does get other 4K sources, will his Marantz model be able to send through the highest possible video quality that his TV supports? What about that 6012, Rob?
Yes, it will. It can do the full HDMI 2.0, 18 gigabits per second, Dolby Vision. It all goes through there. So you're in good shape as far as that goes.
You're set up. Does he need to get new HDMI cables? The ones he has are likely from 10 years ago.
Probably.
You might.
Yeah, probably.
If they're short and really high quality, maybe not.
Maybe not, but given how inexpensive they are from Monoprice, to get some 18 gigabit per second high speed, premium high speed certified, that's what you want to look for. It has the little hologram logo. Premium high speed certified, that's what you need. And given how inexpensive they are, I think that's fine. You'll need one going between your AV receiver and your television, and one going between any of your 4K HDR sources and the AV receiver.
There you go. Should he use HDMI-ARC for the TV's built-in apps, or should he connect an optical cable? The HDMI-ARC would be
Yes, you should, particularly if you want to be able to send Atmos from your built-in app from the Sony TV back downstream to your Marantz. You'll want to use ARC.
And isn't it the case you have to turn on HDMI CEC to make that work?
In the Sony, and they label it as Bravia Sync because they will not call it HDMI CEC. They must brand it with a trademark. So it is Bravia Sync, which does need to be turned on in the Sony TV. Yep. But in the Marantz, you do not have to turn on. They have separated all the parts of HDMI CEC in the Marantz. So you do not have to turn on the control part of it, and you do not have to turn on the synchronized power part of it.
Right,
you do have to turn on the audio return channel part of it.
I remember it was one of the first things I turned off on my stuff and didn't realize I needed it.
Yeah.
So,
on your TV. Yeah.
That's right. He was planning to try AVRant's recommended picture settings. Any tips as far as the video settings go in both the Sony TV and his Marantz receiver? Yeah, nothing wrong with starting with AVRant's recommended picture settings.
They're pretty good these days. In the Marantz, there's really only one thing you need to look out for. In the video settings section, they have a subsection called the 4K signal format, and if you want it to pass through 4K with HDR, that needs to be changed to enhanced. And by default, it is on standard, not enhanced, so you do need to go in there and manually change that setting to enhanced.
Why do things default to the standard when it wouldn't hurt to be on enhanced?
No, I mean, the weird thing was the first models that came out that supported 4K and HDR, which were, I guess, the 11 series 1 year prior, they didn't even have that setting. They're just like, we can do 4K and HDR. That's what we do all the time.
Yeah, I don't get it. My little sort of inexpensive Sony 55-inch in my office here, you have to purposely say this HDMI input needs to be set to enhanced.
That's right.
To get the full signal. Why?
So I can't really tell you why, other than there was the whole thing where there are some devices that won't work with that enhanced signal thing, but mostly those are 3D devices, and this is not a 3D TV, so I'm not super. But similarly, the Sony also has an HDMI signal format setting, which needs to be set to enhanced for whichever HDMI input you're using. So that's one more tip, which AVRant actually does cover. So my tip mostly going through, they want us to say ratings because that's how they pronounce it, but it's spelled AVRant.
It's AVRant, and I'm saying AVRant.
That's what they did. My tip there is to actually read all of their settings, not just go by the images, because they do a better job in the text of explaining. If you just go by the images, I don't think those are the best settings, and they explain why you might want to change some of them in the text. One they don't explain is the gamma setting. They always target a gamma of 2.2 for standard dynamic range. That's what AVRant does. If you're in a very dark room watching movies, you might want to target a 2.4 gamma, which keeps dark things looking darker for longer. To get there, you would adjust the Sony's gamma setting down to -2. So that's possibly...
To me, that's really dark, though.
It looks, I mean, it's for a basically pitch black room and watching movies. Right. Television is mastered to 2.2 gamma. So I don't blame AVRant for targeting that. But if you're a movie buff and you want to be in a pitch black room watching movies, then you might want to turn that down to 2.4. So it's -2 on the gamma setting. The auto local dimming setting is one of the ones that you should read their text because their images all show it setting to high. But high, you might see some artifacting. Medium is the safe setting. You set the auto local dimming to medium, it'll almost always look good for anything. There is the extended dynamic range setting. Technically, for standard dynamic range, that should be off, but the TV just looks better when you set it to low. I just flat out, I'll tell you, it looks better. And it doesn't seem to introduce many problems at all. All of that automatically changes when it kicks into HDR mode, so you don't even have to worry about it. And just make sure that the color is set to Expert 1, but that'll be, if you use their recommended picture mode, it'll be there anyway. Yeah.
There you go. All right. Moving on to Mitch R and Manuel T. Mitch has a split-level home, and his home theater is in the lower section where the floor is concrete directly on top of earth. He has a 15-inch ported rhythmic subwoofer, and he's wondering if the SoundPath Isolation Feet would be of any benefit to him. He can picture how they would make sense for a floor that isn't such hard material, but in general, does a sub on concrete, and especially concrete that is directly on top of earth, still need decoupling? I mean, you can transfer sound through that.
Definitely. Vibrations still make it through concrete, but we'll finish the question since they're related. Yeah.
And along the same lines, Manuel went with our advice and grabbed one of the SVS PB2000 subs during their blowout special. Do we recommend also getting the SoundPath Isolation Feet? In Manuel's case, he He's sure he wants to have damping beneath his sub, but he's wondering if something cheap and easy like workout mats could get the job done. Mouse pads can get the job done.
Yeah. So in terms of an alternative to the SoundPath Isolation Feet, anything that is squishy enough to be springy, but not so soft that the weight of the subwoofer will actually compress it, including over time. So it has to have enough springiness to it that it remains springy all the time, but be springy enough that it's springy.
So just grab an old tire from a junkyard, put it right under there.
But anything that meets that criteria will work, including a folded up comforter or a folded up blanket, but if you want something that looks nicer. But yeah, you don't have to spend $50 to get the SoundPath Isolation Feet if you're okay with something that... So, I mean, they look really nice. They're really convenient. They can actually screw into the bottom where the regular feet go. So, and $50 is not insane. So,
no, that's not crazy stuff.
You know, I like the SoundPath Isolation Feet a lot, but if you want to get the absolute cheapest, then yeah, anything that's springy, not so squishy that it gets compressed. So that answers Manuel's
if you want to
side.
go for that like college apartment style, you just wad up a blanket. That's I lived like that for so long. Well past college.
And actually,
I had blanket curtains.
For Mitch's case, that's what I'm gonna. That's what I always tell anyone who questions whether decoupling / damping of their subwoofer and their speakers is really gonna be of benefit to them. Is you can try it for free as long as you have something like a blanket that you can fold up and temporarily put under your sub, because that's gonna tell you with your own ears whether or not this thing made a worthwhile difference for you. But I want to dispel the myth that concrete is inert. It is not inert. No. Concrete will absolutely vibrate in sympathy, particularly when you have 4 little feet putting all the pounds per square inch of force into that concrete. It will absolutely vibrate in sympathy with the movement of the subwoofer. And what are your walls and the ceiling of your room attached to? They are attached to that concrete. So if the concrete vibrates, then your walls vibrate. And if your walls vibrate, then your ceiling vibrates. And now your whole house is vibrating. And
very specific frequencies might be boosted.
Resonant.
And be really weird. Yeah. We've all seen that old black and white film with the bridge that's twisting in the wind.
That's a concrete
exactly
bridge.
What can happen.
It is not rock solid, immovable. Concrete can move. So
it does.
And yeah, I'm not... I hope your concrete isn't literally directly on Earth, because that would result in moisture wicking up through that concrete. There should be
gravel and whatnot.
There should be some sort of layer in between the earth and the concrete itself that allows for wicking and drainage. But assuming that's what he means, that it's built directly on top of there, that doesn't change the concrete from vibrating in sympathy. That is a myth that concrete is inert somehow. But fold up a blanket and hear it with your own ears, and that'll tell you whether it's worth it or not.
There you go. Manuel also wants to know which wireless adapter he should get for his subwoofer. SVS sells one, but he isn't sure if that's the one to get. Now, we talked about such a thing just a little while ago.
Yeah. Outlaw Audio is my top choice there. The OAW4. It's $130, though, for the pair of the transmitter and the receiver, so it's not the cheapest one out there, but I think it has the nicest form factor, and the signal is always rock solid, and I like that one. I'm not a huge fan of the one SVS sells. Anecdotally, some people are like, occasionally you get a little noise in it or a little dropout or something, which is really common with these. It's one of the reasons I'm willing to pay $130 for the Outlaw one, because that thing is I mean, I guess it's not impossible. It's wireless, so it's got to be possible to interfere with it, but it's as rock solid as it gets. If you just want the cheapest thing out there, then Dayton Audio's Wavelink, which is only $58 over at Parts Express, could get the job done, but don't expect it to be rock solid. But it's actually a pretty darn good little device.
And never forget the option of pulling the carpet up and pushing it back down over an RCA cable. Never forget that option.
Well, what do you say, Lee? Right. Last question?
Last question, and we have to, because every time I'm on, we have an Infinite Gary question.
That's what I was hoping for.
There we go. We made it to Infinite Gary. Infinite Gary has a question. While experimenting with different amplifiers for his speakers, Gary has noted that some have a quieter background than others. Yeah, that's Infinite Gary's kind of language right there. Is there a particular number in the specs that would indicate this quietness? Is it distortion or something else? So, what are our units of quiet background, Rob?
Right. So, I I believe I know what he's talking about, which is the noise floor. Amplifiers do have a noise floor, right? Any amplifier, connect your speakers to it, and then get yourself up really close to the tweeter. I mean, sometimes your ear almost touching the tweeter, but you will hear a soft, faint hiss from any amplifier, but some of them are definitely louder than others. There's no question about that. That is the noise floor. So there's really two things you can look for that are listed in the specs of most amplifiers that you'll be readily able to find. The primary one is the signal-to-noise ratio.
Right.
So if we're talking about 16-bit audio, which is still the majority of audio,
it is.
then if you have a signal-to-noise ratio of 96 decibels or higher, then for 16-bit audio, you should have essentially a zero noise floor. You won't in practice, but you're getting closer. So you're looking for a value above 96. But since we're listening to discs that are 24-bit audio, if you can get all the way up to 120 decibels of signal-noise ratio, that is going to be a very, very quiet noise floor on that amplifier.
Does that exist
in
amplifiers?
That's what Monoprice Monolith delivers. That's what ATI's amplifiers deliver, is over 120 decibel signal-to-noise ratio, and that's why I praise them for their, for me to hear the noise floor on my ATI amplifier with my Ascend Acoustics RAL ribbon speakers, which will reveal the noise floor of any amplifier because it takes nothing to move those tweeters. I pretty much have to have my ear against the little metal grate in front of that ribbon tweeter.
Okay.
It does exist, but it kind of takes that to hear any hiss. So That's praise amazing. That. So yeah, signal-to-noise ratio is certainly the one you can look for. And yeah, if you're over 100, you're in really good territory, basically. But
So what's the dollar figure that gets you to that 24-bit audio signal-to-noise level? You see what I'm asking?
How do you get to over 100 dB quiet or 120 dB quiet?
What do you have to spend is what I'm asking to get to that level of performance.
Yeah, so I mean the Monoprice Monolith is really where you are. So 2 channels of that is $1,000.
Okay.
And they're only charging about $100 for each additional channel. So yeah, so I mean the 5-channel Monolith is I think $1,300. So I mean, it's certainly not cheap, but it doesn't have to be astronomical, and that's
not exotically expensive.
And that thing's I think 124 decibel signal-to-noise ratio. Like I say, it's dead quiet, that thing. Now, there is one other figure that you can look for, which is the damping factor, because the damping factor relates to your speakers are not just speakers, they are also microphones. So any movement in the air is causing the drivers of the speakers to move, which is sending a signal back down the speaker wire into your amplifier, and the amplifier has to have a damping factor enough to damp the back channel signal that's coming in. Basically, effectively, there's also a whole thing with the impedance matching that has to do with the damping factor. Anybody's like, hey, technically, engineering, Rob, that's not right at all what you're talking about. So there's the whole impedance factor side of it that you can calculate as far as the damping factor goes. But in terms of what you're going to be able to hear and matching it to some sort of number, if you're seeing a damping factor that's in excess of, 180 is the damping factor that you're sort of aiming for mathematically. And again, like the Monoprice Monoliths have a 400 for their damping factor. It's well above what you're going to need, and so they're going to remain dead quiet.
And there we go. So there's a way for Infinite Gary to get his deep black backgrounds, his quiet, hauntingly quiet backgrounds. I think he should run out this second
and buy a Monoprice Monolith. He's got
do it right now.
He's got all these Parasound amplifiers around his house. Very nice, expensive, very good sounding amplifiers. No problem with them. But you got to go run out and buy some Monoprice Monoliths there, Gary.
He needs to make another purchase this week, I think. Infinite Gary does. And then report back.
We have left on our list Neil M. Let's see, is that all Neil? Yeah, that's all Neil. Ken B. and Mike S. And there were, of course, questions that came in on Monday and Tuesday, but I cut off the topic list on Sunday when I'm writing it up. So, gentlemen, you're on the list. Folks who wrote in on Monday and Tuesday, you'll be on the list. Everybody until this coming Sunday will be on the list.
Hey, only leaving 3 questions is pretty good.
That was pretty. We left 7 last week, so we put a dent in her.
Not bad at all.
Let's pop back up to the top here and thank our listeners of the week. Once again, anybody who'd like to donate via PayPal, come to the website, avrant.com. On the right-hand side, it says support AVRant. That'll take you to PayPal.
Remember, there's no maximum dollar amount.
That's
It's
correct.
fine.
That's
Put
correct.
in whatever dollar amount you want.
And it's one time, so you won't even notice and miss it. Just don't look at the credit card statement for that month. Over at Patreon, if you'd like an automatic monthly donation set up, you say what amount you want to give us each month, and it happens automatically. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast, and we want to thank our 120 patrons over there.
That's nice.
Mhm. Also want to thank Neil M for telling SVS that we're the reason he bought his pair of PC2000 Pro subwoofers, and Monty N, who bought two pairs of the RBH EP1 earphones and let RBH know that we recommended them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I like them too.
Yeah, for sure. Also want to mention Art, Brian, and Neil. Thank you very much for the notes of encouragement and thanking us for continuing to do the podcast. It's always nice to receive those messages. Really, really nice of you. So, anybody who wants their question answered, please email it to us, question@avrant.com. That is by far the best way to ask your question and have it get onto the podcast. So, Lee, thank you so much once again for dropping in, talking to us.
You're very welcome. Again, I enjoy it every time. It is
awesome.
becoming my hobby too. And if extra money comes to me magically from the sky, I'll make it even more of a hobby.
And anybody who wants to reach you directly, where can they do that?
Just find me on Twitter at Lee Overstreet. And because you can tell what I did with my name and my username on Twitter, I like to give people the chance to suss out what I am on Instagram.
He likes
so I'm
his
Lee
puns.
Overtweet.
That's your.
I'm Lee Overstreet on Twitter.
hint.
What might I be on Instagram?
Indeed. Well, for AVRant and on behalf of Tom Andry, I'm Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.